When you see a chord written down like C major, A major, D minor, there's two parts to the name. There's the note you need to start a chord from, and then there's the type of chord to build starting from that note. And although we have different spellings and obviously different octaves, there's really 12 different notes on the piano that we could start any one type of chord from. When you know what the notes in a chord are, for example, a C major has a C, an E, and a G, in actual music, those three notes could then be spread or voiced across the piano in all different kinds of ways. You can play each note more than once. They might be broken up into patterns. But to help you make sense of those notes and where they come from, we need to think about how chords are built in their root position first. And that's kind of like the original basic form of a chord. Each type of chord, no matter what key it's in, which note you start it from, has a particular formula or recipe, like a list of ingredients it's made of. Those ingredients are called intervals, and I'll explain more about those along the way, but really they're just the different sized gaps between notes. That means that we can also say that each type of chord, when it's in root position, has its own particular pattern or spacing of notes. First, we need to get you thinking about how to build chords in the right way with an approach that will give you a good foundation to learn chords in every key and keep learning more and more chord types in the future. Then I'm going to show you how that works with major and minor chords, the two most common, foundational and important types of chords to learn first. We're going to start from the note C first, as it's the clearest place to do this for the first time. So if we look at the note C, up to the next C, an octave higher, we're only going to go up to there for now to keep things straightforward, because beyond that, it's kind of like we're just repeating the same notes again anyway. When we play a chord, what we're doing is we're mixing notes together in harmony to create new kinds of sounds. So if we were to start a chord from C, all these notes in between C and the next C up is our kind of range of options to choose from that we could possibly use. Here's the really important thing you need to think about. Instead of using note names this time, we're going to think about each of those notes as an interval. That means each of these notes are just different sized distances measured in half steps away from our starting point, which is C in the first example. That part right there, that's the way this whole thing works again when we start a chord from a different note. If we start a chord somewhere else, it's going to have different notes in, and we can just use those same distances again for that chord type to find them. We can measure how far away they are by counting the half steps. From C, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then the octave is 12 half steps. But instead of just saying the amount of half steps all the time, we then have interval names for each of those different sized gaps away from the root, the starting point. The really important thing about intervals is that a huge part of the character to the sound that we hear in music comes from the relationship between notes. So the same sized gap between these two notes or these two notes has that same element to it, even though the notes are all different. Obviously, this is only one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important foundation that kind of sets the tone. Now, of course, the range that you play in, how high or low, how you play the chords and everything has a big impact too. So instead of thinking of the different note names as different possibilities, we need to think of each different sized gap or each different interval from where we start a chord as one of those possible ingredients we could choose from. A different flavour of sound, if you like. The flavour comes from how far apart the notes are, not what the specific notes are. Each interval size has a name too. I'll put these up on screen. Sometimes we have different names for the same sizes too, and that's to do with spelling in different situations, kind of like how F sharp can also be called G flat sometimes, and that's going to depend on context when to use which one. So I think that the best way to think about what each type of chord you learn is just as a selection of a few of these intervals, which tells us how far apart to space the notes out from each other from whichever note you want to start from. That gives us the original form of the chord, the root position, and then once we know what the notes are, we can do lots of different things with them. This idea works for scales too, as well, and just like if you're cooking food, different combinations go with each other and react together in different ways to create all these different and unique emotional characteristics that each type of chord has. Now there's lots of standard combinations that we use that we need to gradually learn. And the first two are major and minor chords, which we're going to do in a couple of different keys to get how this works. Just quickly first, if this video has been helpful so far, then please click the like button because that's really helpful for the channel and to get videos shown to more people. And I do have a free PDF available from my website. There's a link in the description below, which has graphics and spellings and alternate spellings for all 12 major and minor chords. And I do have a much bigger PDF, which isn't free, but it's a big comprehensive guide on how to build loads of different common types of chords. And it has a massive glossary at the back with graphics of all these chords in every key, and it has a cheat sheet with all these chord formulas to help you as you go learn how all these chords are built. So let's start with a major chord first. From C, remember between C and C, this is our range of intervals that we can choose from, and each interval is a different size distance away from our starting point C. Major and minor chords both have 3 notes in, and we also call them triads. The formula for a major chord is a root. Well, everything actually has a root. So the next one is a major third. That would be E when we've started from C. A major third is 4 half steps or 2 whole steps away from the starting point. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps away from C. That happens to equal E. And a major third has this kind of bright sound to it. And the next note is a perfect fifth, which is 7 half steps away from the root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now just to point out, counting 7 half steps each time isn't the way to find this chord every time. We need to learn these by heart, particularly with our fundamental major and minor chords to start with. But I'm just trying to get you to understand exactly what it is at the moment. And you'll notice that the third is 3 letters away from C, C, D, E. And the fifth, G, is 5 letters away from C, C, D, E, F, G. And that's how we always spell these chords. Whichever number the interval in the chord is, that's how many letters of the musical alphabet it has to span. And we can think of it as stacking thirds as well, if you like. So we can think of here to here as a major third, and we can also picture this gap here as a minor third, which is 3 half steps. So from here, 1, 2, 3. So it's like a minor third on top of a major third. You can also find that chord by playing the first, third, and fifth notes of a C major scale. Now we can also think of chords as coming from scales, and those two ideas are really interconnected, but I think it's much more useful to understand what a chord is first, and then think about where we can find those chords in scales as a separate but also really important thing to do another time. Now I'm going to do that starting from E. So if we're starting a chord from E, we need to picture E to E. And now we think of all these notes in between as our selection of intervals, and we'd use the same interval names for each sized gap still. Each sized would just equal a different note this time. So for E major, we'd need that major third, which is 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. We can find that quicker by going 2 whole steps. So this note, you might know it as A flat or G sharp, but which one do we use? Well, we're calling this interval a third, so we need to use the one that's 3 letters away, E, F, G. So we need to call it G sharp. And then the note that's 7 half steps away from the starting point E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is B. So now we've got this. Now importantly here, this E major chord and this C major chord, they look different, don't they? Because this one has a black key in the middle, but the spacing between the notes, if you count how many half steps, is exactly the same. A minor chord then changes one of those flavors. Let's go back to C. So now we're referencing C to C again. Instead of the major third, we're going to swap that out and we're going to replace it with the minor third. If the major third is this big, 4 half steps away, a minor third is the one down. So it's only 3 half steps away from the root. So if we look at that C major and then we lower that major third by a half step, we have the minor third here now. The fifth is the same. This flavor is the same in a major and a minor chord. But now, if we compare the sound of this C major to C minor, that's going to sound very different now. It's got a very different, often described as sadder or a darker character to it. So this note here could be called D sharp or E flat, but because it's a kind of third, we still need to use the letter E. C, D, E is 3 letters from the starting point C. So both kinds of third, the major third in the major chord and the minor third in the minor chord, would both always use the same letter. They'd be on the same position on sheet music as well. One would just have a flat. So the overall chord in root position would look like the same shape too. So this minor chord, we can also picture this as a minor third here with a major third from this note to that note stacked on top. So a major third was 2 whole steps. That can help you picture the shape, and that's actually back to front to a major chord, which I said earlier was a major third with a minor third stacked on top. Let's create a minor chord starting from E now. So from the note E, well, we had E major before, didn't we? So we can find that minor third. I said it was a half step smaller than a major third, didn't I? So if we lower that by a half step, we've now got E minor. So that is 3 half steps away from the starting point. 1, 2, 3. So now we've created the same spacing of notes from E as we had from C minor. So they both have that dark minor chord quality to them. Both of those chord types contain a root, a third and a fifth, but crucially they contain a different type of third. Now you know the basic theory, you need to put that into practice and work on recognizing those shapes in every key and memorizing these major and minor chords, because we use them all the time. We need to get them so you can play them without thinking. So check out in the description, I've got some practice videos to help you with that. The challenge is that the shapes keep appearing different with the different mixtures of black and white keys. I also recommend checking out the videos on inversions where we learn to start playing chords in different ways. And I have some guided practice videos to help you recognize all your individual intervals on the piano too, which is really important. Plus there's the PDF I have too, recapping all this theory stuff, the whole process, and a whole massive glossary of all those chords. I hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.